Good evening and welcome to our monthly installment of MOSIF's APIs over IPA's Meetup. We're coming to you from the heart of Techland in San Francisco, California. I'm Lawrence Ebringer, the Chief Marketing Officer of MOSIF. MOSIF provides insights and tooling for API product owners to monitor, manage, and monetize their customer base. Joining me tonight is Bryan Hughes, an experienced entrepreneur, CXO, and developer. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you.
Where in the world did you come from tonight?
I came from the Russian River, so we live now up in the Redwoods, so about an hour and a half up north.
Very nice, very nice. When I tried to pin down Bryan on coming tonight, he was out and about installing Wi-Fi. So what were you doing installing Wi-Fi in the wilderness of Sonoma Valley?
Yeah, so I'm semi-retired, so I kind of dove into community support. So I'm installing free public Wi-Fi for all of downtown Guerneville up in the Russian River. And then I just got a $400,000 ARPA grant, which is COVID relief money. So we're going to duplicate that for some other unincorporated disadvantaged rural communities throughout Sonoma County, including Bodega Bay, Jenner. So
That's great. So all the places that The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock was shot.
yes,
in. Very nice.
That's true.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
So Bryan's career spans more than 30 years in tech. He cut his teeth at Wells Fargo, where he built one of the first multi-terabit data warehouses, which eliminated microfiche, which, looking around this audience, I don't think there's many people old enough, one guy is smiling, old enough to remember what microfiche was back in prehistoric times. He then went on and worked at a bunch of very well-known companies, including WebMD, Shutterfly, Friendster, and Oracle, to name but four. And most recently, he started an IoT company called GOFACTORY and sold it within 12 months for a very handsome profit, and then went on and became one of the CTOs of Nokia. But we're here today to talk about one of Bryan's most overarching observations throughout his career, which was the recipe for a successful company. And specifically, why you should be product-led as opposed to engineering-led or sales-led. And I temper this with a slight tongue-in-cheek, because in the back row in the corner is the CEO of MOSIF, who is an engineer. So initially we were definitely engineering-led, but now we are most certainly customer and product-led.
Yeah, so I'm actually an engineer by heart too. So, and I would say product-driven, but engineering constrained. So it's a feedback loop. So product drives engineering, but engineering needs to constrain product, because if you leave product, I like to say, if you leave engineers to their own devices, they're going to solve a problem that nobody needs, right? And if you leave product people to their own devices, they'll just make it look pretty. So, so you sort of need the cooperation and the collaboration of both product and marketing, and ultimately it's customer driven.
So that's a really good takeaway. So maybe, I have to cheat here. I have to admit that I cheated when we had an introductory phone call to figure out what we're going to talk about. I asked Bryan for some of his key takeaways from the companies he worked at. One of them being GoFactory, which was sold, which I'm sure he'll now tell you, for a lot of money within 12 months with a product, but no customers and no product market fit. So why don't you share about what not to do at a company, although you had a very good exit?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a big fan that one way you can look at is a measure of success is by following other people's success. But the reality is that you don't know if that success was pure chance, right? Or if it was a formula that actually works. So my experience has been the road to success is actually learning from failure, right? And failure doesn't mean that, you know, I'm dead or I'm down on the ground. I mean, I sold my company, but at the end of the day, we had no customers, right? And so it's a unique place to be, is where you raise money, and then 1 year later you sell it for a pretty good multiple, and you sold it with 0 customers, right? And so we started off with a technology. It was an IoT, a massively distributed IoT platform, and I wrote it in Erlang. So it was the right technology. So I was very proud of what we built. It was an actor model. So each of the endpoints had a virtual actor that was running within our cloud. And so you could imbue behavior. So a truck could have an agent that represented a single truck. Well, if you have a fleet of 100,000 trucks, then you have 100,000 individual agents running in our cloud. And I was really proud that we had built this incredible feat of engineering in my mind, right? And there was another company called Relayer that came about at the same time we did. And they were just an ingestion platform, which means they would connect and just simply pull in the data. And I was convinced that we would beat them, right?
Just interjecting for a minute, what made you start the company programming in Erlang to make this massive, scalable IoT platform? And I know that you should bring in, we had lunch around that time, and you had Siemens, and it was like wired cities, and it was like really big deals, like hundreds of millions of dollars deals in the pipeline. How did you identify that was a market need? Or were you just an engineer with Erlang programming capability looking for an application?
It's really the latter part. So it's really kind of hilarious, and you're all going to really find this really funny. We started off not as an IoT company. We had no intention of being an IoT company. We were actually trying to build a microsocial app. So it was about the time when GroupMe was out. So there was, Microsoft bought them for, I think, 80 million. So there was all this first time, how do I form a group and communicate with each other, right? So this was the early 2000s. And so we originally tried to build a consumer app that would, track people. And the technology we built and the way we built it, it was cool. The problem is we were way behind the 8 ball. So everyone else had already just got funded, right? And then crap. All right, so we pivoted, and this is all within a 2-year period before we got funding. We pivoted, and we said, all right, we're going to be a platform as a service, right? Because I had built this amazing technology, API-driven, all this stuff, and Parse came out. So I don't know if many of you remember Parse, but it was a back-end platform as a service for storing data sets in the cloud that gamers used. And so we missed that boat. And then we got this opportunity to work with an enterprise company that said, hey, can your technology treat humans and non-humans the same? i.e. trucks, sensors. And I said, yes, we can. And so that was the inception of our IoT platform, was that we were able to create actors that weren't just humans, but also non-humans, and they would actually talk to each other. So what would happen is the truck, when the driver is driving too fast and braking too hard, right, you get really bad gas mileage, you have your maintenance, you're going to have premature maintenance. It's very bad when you have a big fleet. And so we were going to say, all right, cool, not only can we start to predict failure, so we were trying to get AI driven as well, but
you're covering everything here. I mean, you went from social networking. I mean, you have a background from Friendster, so you obviously knew social networking. Now you went into fleet management, and I'm sure there's going to be 2 more pivots before you sell to.
No. So that was our pivot into IoT. That's how I sold the company, and it eventually got acquired up into Nokia, where I was actually chief architect of IoT there after the acquisition. But it was I sat there and thought, oh, this is the best technology ever, right? Humans and non-humans, and so we actually demonstrated a truck could actually send a push notification to the driver directly, right? There's no other massive pieces of technology. It was just the agent in this one little area would then send a push notification to the driver directly and say, slow down. So the lesson I learned here was that it didn't matter how beautiful of a piece of engineering that we built, right? This other company, Relayer, came along, about the same time, and they kept getting funding, more funding than we got, but more importantly, they got customers. We never got a customer. We had potential for customers. So we were looking at doing connected cities, we're working with Siemens, but they kept getting customers, and they started getting market share. And they kept owning the manufacturing. Like they were the IoT platform for manufacturing. And so lo and behold, they win. They were eventually acquired for $350 million. So
real money.
Back in we had a successful exit, but nothing in the order of $350 million. And so later, I discovered that their success was we had never figured out really, and I'd like to say how to productize. So we built a platform, but we had never had a customer, so we never got customer feedback. So we kept missing the mark every time we thought we would have a product. Relayer, it turned out they were working with Munich Re, which is a reinsurer. So it's a large German company that underwrites insurance policies. And so using the Relayer technology, they were able to have predictable insight into manufacturing lines. So they could guarantee that 10,000 widgets would be produced per day on this line. So this is huge for companies like Apple and Samsung and these big companies that rely on their income. So Munich Re would offer business continuance insurance. So their brilliance was that they saw what their product was not an IoT platform, but the ability to provide insurance. So that was a stroke of brilliance.
So
right?
do you think they got that because they had a relationship with the reinsurer, or they just had great marketing prowess and they figured it out?
I wish I would love to sit down with somebody. I only know it because we were actually working with Munich Re for another project, and so I learned it that way. But I don't know, like if they, again, this is where you get to, is like, was their success happenstance, right? Were they just at the right time at the right place, or was there somebody who said, I'm building you a IoT platform that's going to guarantee business continuance.
Right. Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So in GOFACTORY, you had a platform that the founder of the company, engineering driven, coded it up, and you were looking for a market, effectively. And then you pivoted, you went to fleet management, that didn't pan out. Siemens got interested for connected cities. That was a huge deal. I mean, those were hundreds of millions of dollars potential.
And they were, and it was actually for traffic management. So it was going to be perfect because our little agents, so at every intersection, you have not only the traffic light, but you have the vehicle sensors, and you have this thing called a malfunctioning monitoring unit. So it's the green box that you see at every intersection. And what it does is it makes sure that there's never two green lights. So it's the governor, right, for traffic control systems. And technically these are all internet connected, and they go back to a central system like in the city. And so Siemens, they used to be the dominant player in this, and so we were going to connect into this so that the agents that are the traffic control systems would be able to call for dispatch directly for help.
Oh.
So when a traffic light failed, it would look for the nearest service person, and then it would send them a push notification and say, help me, I'm not working. And Siemens liked it at first, but then they themselves lost their market share.
Oh.
And so they actually shut down the division that we were working with.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so again, we're slightly behind the 8 ball on that one.
Right. So what are the key takeaways from GOFACTORY? So you got a piece of cool technology, but it was looking for a market. And when you did find a market, that unfortunately you were late to the game in fleet management, it sounds like, and your primary customer at Siemens evaporated and you had no backup customer. So I suppose the takeaway is you need multiple customers to be a success.
Well, so like I said, in hindsight, GoFactory I don't think was a success. Right? I sold the company, great, did well with it. But, it ended up not going anywhere, so, it's sort of shelved in Nokia these days. Right? They're not really doing anything with it either. And so what I learned there is obviously you got to make sure you take off your engineering kind of blinders, right? And I failed to do that, even though I'm actually sort of a product person. My background's in art, so I have a degree in fine arts and industrial design from the California College of the Arts. And so I do like to think I see things as a product, but clearly I was wrong. And I mean, at the end of the day, it worked because of perseverance. I persevered even though we didn't really have a product.
Right.
So.
Right. Oh, very good story. Very good story. So going back a little bit to the central nugget of making successful companies, talk about the inception stage.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it in passing before, but I think that's a lot of the crux of how you really make product-driven companies a big success.
Yes. So along the way, you know, you discover successful ways that people are using for success, and agile is obviously an important process, you know, that's been around for a while now.
And we all agile proponents, right?
Yeah.
There we go. Everyone from MOSIF puts up their hand.
Yeah.
And someone from,
Yeah.
okay.
And so along the way, though, you also learn that agile as a process is bad. So what? Again, this is just my personal opinion on the subject, but I think agile, a Kanban style agile, is a good form of agile, which is, you know, Kanban actually came from Toyota, right? So Toyota used to, they're known for making amazing cars, right, on the manufacturing line, and they did this because they empowered each of the people at every step to hit a button and turn it off. And so fundamentally what Kanban means is that I operate only at the capacity of each of my employees, right? So, and Toyota, you know, they won, right? They beat Detroit. Detroit was putting out crap cars at the time. And so the Kanban style agile, which is different than Scrum. So I do not like Scrum. I think Scrum is really a failure in my book. And the reason being is because these arbitrary 2-week sprints don't make sense. So in my last company I was working with, you know, we focused on building an agile process that employs Inception. And Inception is a key point in which you get all the stakeholders together and you get everybody to agree on what you're building, right? So this is why engineering is product driven, because product ultimately sends the features down the hopper, right? But there's a wall around engineering. So you can't just, so imagine engineering is a conveyor belt, right? And on the conveyor belt are these trays, and each tray represents an iteration. So it's a subtle difference in the iteration versus a sprint, still 2 weeks long. Your development cycle is 8 weeks. So at the end of the conveyor belt, so I have 4 trays or 3 trays on my conveyor belt, and then one of the trays is in the oven, right? And so the oven represents, or the manufacturing, that represents what engineering is currently working on, right? So this is the 2-week iteration, and this is what my engineers are working on, whether it's my back end, my front end, or my deep learning. So my last company was called Lodestar AI. We were building a annotation tool. So it actually used active learning, so to do annotation. And what we had done is our tool would allow you to do 10,000 hours of annotations with just a handful of people. And the reason, because the tool itself had an active learning engine, and so it would learn how you were annotating to do a better job at annotating. And then after just 20 annotations, it would bootstrap itself so that you would then, the AI would point you to those frames in the video that it couldn't pick, that had a low confidence threshold. Very successful product. At least it was. Our CEO, or our CTO at the time, so this is the time where I actually was just working as a VP of engineering, he kept getting distracted by sparkling, shiny things. So he kept pushing us to implement stuff that he thought a customer would want. Mind you, we didn't yet have any customers. We're on the verge of getting customers, right? So what we built, though, was the process that we built was solid, right? So our product team was busy, our UI, UX, so UI, UX was up in the product side. They're busy working on the lo-fi and high fidelity screens. They're working on creating user stories, right? So their epics or their user journeys, right, describe kind of a functional process, right? And so product does agile themselves. They write user stories. Instead of estimating cost, cost estimate, they'll just say this is a high value, medium value, or low value, right? And so product then decides, all right, we got another 8-week iteration coming up. Which of our stories would we like engineering to work on, right?
And they have a 2-week window in the oven in the factory where they.
So what happens is when product fills. It's really an amazing system. So what happens very quickly, and I built the team from scratch. So we quickly went to 0 to 25, and when you start, you have no idea the velocity of your engineers, right? You don't know, and the other thing is you don't want to kill your engineers, right? Everyone has a life. You want people to go home.
We don't have a life here in Mostly. No one has a life.
But
Don't worry, we'll cut that. We'll cut that out of the video. Oh, it's live.
But
Okay,
pizza
sorry.
and beer is very good.
Very good.
Very
Okay,
good.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
better than Google. They don't serve.
They don't serve
Heineken.
beer at Google?
They don't serve Heineken.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
so
Yeah, those good days have gone at Google. They've gone.
yeah, so the key is it all boils down to your quality of your engineering comes out of the quality of your code that's written, right? And that happens when you have a happy engineering team. A happy engineering team comes from the fact that people have a quality of life, right? So sure, as we get closer to that 8-week window, people might be burning the hours,
Yeah.
but the overall goal is I want my engineering team to estimate the complexity of a story honestly, right? So I don't want them to sandbag it because they're going to I don't want to work so hard. I want them to be honest. And so what happened is we did this. So every time a story would come through, we would have it properly estimate, a proper estimate on it. So the question is, how do you get to this? And Inception is how you do this. So what happens is that ideally your product people are listening to customer support. So customer support's actually one of the best places to hear what the customer likes and doesn't like. And too often, nobody pays attention to customer service or support, customer success. So ideally, you should be listening to them. So they're a stakeholder into the product. So they're at the top. Your customers, and then marketing. The problem with marketing,
Because I'm in marketing. That's
well,
good.
the problem with marketing too is that you could accidentally, not listen to your customers because you're market driven and you think the market's over here.
Right.
But the reality is, if your customer says, this piece of functionality is crap,
Right.
you better fix
They
it.
never say that. Customers never say that.
Yeah, but you need to fix it, right? And even better yet is if the majority of your customers say, if you could do this, my life would be even better, right? And so that's what you should be listening to when you're building a product. Problem is in a bootstrap where you don't have customers, it's a challenge because you can get caught in this myopic cycle of constantly thinking what these imaginary customers might need, right? And then so that's good at first, right? Mm-hmm. But at some point you need to get customers, right? And if you're not getting customers, you need to kind of evaluate why, right? So when you have, let's say you now have customers, or you have some input coming in, your product people, your UI, UX, right? They go through and they listen and they translate those into stories, right? And it depends on the size of the feature. Maybe it's a small feature, maybe it's an epic, right? Or a user journey. And then they order or prioritize their own stories, right? So they want to say, all right, here's a medium value, high value, low value, and this is the priority of it. And so if you put it on a simple graph matrix, you'll see things in the left side are high priority, high value. Things on the right side are low priority, low value. And so it's all right, cool, let's go after these things. So once they've done this, you go into what's called Inception. So Inception is where all the stakeholders come to play, and it's typically your product and your engineering.
Now, do they? Is it pistols at dawn? Is it fencing? Is it some sort of boxing match? Or
No. You have a model. So and it's you create so every time you do these inceptions, you have a simple Word a Word document. It's a template. It says, what's my goal? What's the mission? And let's say, for example, you're going to be doing a new feature. Well, typically what will happen is before the feature gets to engineering, your UI UX will have all of your high fidelity screens done, right? Or at least your low fidelity, right? And so what happens is when you product arrives at inception, right? Now your engineering team and your product teams, sometimes it takes the entire day, sits there and you start going through each function, one by one. So every screen, every piece of text, every section that you have, whatever it is you've got, you go through this, right? And your engineers have an opportunity, so your product people kind of are there to talk about what the function does, and your engineers then, what they need to do is come up with an estimate. So the estimate should be complexity, right? So a lot of people kind of get this wrong. They think it's effort. Like, oh, this will take me 1 day. And they use a Fibonacci scale, right? So it's like, I'll use 1 for 1 day, 3 for 3 days, 5 for 5 days, right? So you really should use the Fibonacci scale to represent complexity. Is this a small t-shirt, medium t-shirt, large, extra large? Or you can think of it as an iceberg. Is it an iceberg or is it an ice cube, right? What is this that you're building? The reason why complexity is important is because it may look like a simple feature, and on the surface you'll say, oh, I can do this in 2 days. But once you start on the engineering of it, because there might be a lot of unknowns, it quickly becomes an iceberg, right? And so you want to have this honest conversation where you say, all right, this looks like a simple thing, but it's really complex, right? And there's a point where the complexity of a feature turns into an epic, right? And so this might be all new, it might be common sense to everybody, could be just like, saying, oh, Bryan, I already know this. But it works. It absolutely works. And so now what happens is in the inception phase, product is never allowed to bypass an inception. And I can explain to you that this fails. Our CTO was notorious for doing this, and he screwed up our releases all the time.
This is at Lodestar, the AI platform.
So because he would work independently with a product person, they would then talk directly to an engineer, and then they would put it in a hopper, and then everything's a mess. So what happens is when the process is working well, you have a 2-week iteration, and it doesn't take very long, just a couple of weeks actually, depending on what tool you're using, but you can actually start to see what is the real cadence of my back-end engineers. Because all you have to do is look at how many points did they actually finish every 2 weeks, right? So you quickly are able to get to this point where you have an honest representation of complexity. Your engineers are giving an honest report, and you can very quickly, it takes several iterations, obviously, but you come in and say, all right, this is my real cadence, right? This is the honest cadence. People are going home, they're being with their families, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, whatever, right? But I know that my engineering team can do 12 points every 2 weeks. All right, I know my front-end team can do 8 points every 2 weeks. I know my deep learning team can do 15 points every 2 weeks. And it's usually 12 to 15, it's not exact. But at least what it does is as the manager, I can now communicate effectively that we are actually going to deliver this, right? In 8 weeks, we're going to have this. So the process is kind of self-leveling. And what I mean by that is when that 2-week bin goes into the machine, imagine the bin is a perfect size for the hole that goes into manufacturing. So anything that's above it gets scraped off, right? So when I put that 12 points in, if I accidentally put in 16 points, right, and my team can only usually do 14, pretty typically I can guarantee you that something isn't going to get done. So at the end of every 2 weeks, you do what's called an iteration review. And this only takes 15 minutes. So you go through and you say, all right, cool. We got this done, we didn't get these things done. So what they do is they naturally fall into the next bin. But now that bin, again, think of it as liquid, right? Now that bin is too full because during Inception, you level out all 8 bins, or all 8 weeks, right? So you actually have your points leveled out in each bin over the course of 8 weeks. And so what happens then is that you start to get a pretty good idea when a feature set isn't going to make it, right? Because if you're on the 3rd bin, which is 6 weeks into your development cycle, and you still have features overflowing into the next bin, then you really got to go back to product and everybody and say, we have to pull some features from this release because they're not going to get done in time.
Right. Fascinating explanation of Inception and calibrating how to grow your effectiveness of your engineering team and by extension your company. One big red flag that I see just from listening to your description is how do you identify or how do you calibrate what a single point of complexity is? How do you said there's 12 points, the machine can take 14 maybe, so if you give it 16, 2 points are going to fall off. How do you calculate complexity?
So that's a great question, and that's why you have to have a work environment that your engineers are giving you an honest response. So during Inception, that's when so at Inception, what you do is once you have all of your features, you've reviewed them, the last thing you do is you prioritize them. So let's say, for example, you have 18 things that are going out in this 8 weeks. So I take each one of those features, I prioritize them 1 to 18, and then you do a linear complexity. Mm-hmm. So if you have 2 things that came in at 5, right, then they have to be in order. And then so you basically can just plug them into an Excel document, and then suddenly you have this really pretty graph, and it shows you all the features on the left side, and all the features again, it's the same process. And so everything that's on the left side are low complexity, high priority. That's what you do. So the thing that people don't realize is engineering is incredibly expensive.
Right. Oh, yes.
Right? So you need to realize that your engineer is very valuable and their time is incredibly valuable.
Right.
And so you don't want them just to be randomly working on some crazy expensive feature just because your CTO thinks it's shiny, right? And that was our problem, right? And so you want to say, no, I want to be judicious. I want to be, because what it does is it allows you to get it out quickly. If you have customers, then it gets you, you're able to then get quick feedback, right? So then it's like, oh, cool. And then they'll tell you, like, this is great, do more. Or, right? And then that's why it helps you kind of, so every 8 weeks with your customer feedback, you have this opportunity to kind of like weave through all of this complexity of what if, what does the market want, what do my customers, and actually it landed something that people want.
So this takes into account, I mean, you're a very modest fellow, but Bryan is one of those people who is a 10xer, so he can do the work of 10 normal engineers single-handedly. But there are other people who aren't 10xers, but iteratively you go back and your engineering team or your team, even a marketing team, in total, you can figure out, okay, how many features can they knock off in every 2 weeks?
Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to say is the goal, the important thing is I want my team, if you're the type of person who you don't even think twice and you are a 10xer, awesome. If you're a 5xer, it doesn't matter. The goal of the team and the engineers is to not, I want them to like enjoy their life while they're enjoying their job, while producing high quality code and creating a great product, right? And it all boils down to like really paying attention to your engineers or your product people. It goes the same way on the 2 sides of the equation, right? Stop working 18 hours, right? You're not going to produce much of, except for a lot of bugs maybe.
Right.
Work an 8-hour day, work a 9-hour day, right? The key is that once the process shows me my capacity, my throughput, I can now go back as the management. And when we sit down and we decide what we're going to like do as a company, the executive team, I have an honest expectation. So it boils down to setting expectations, right? If as a manager, I'm not giving the right expectations to the executive management, they're going to push for a product, and they're going to make press releases, and they're going to do all of this stuff, and then when it looks like you're going to miss the date, then shit hits the fan, right? Because you're missing the press release. We need to have this. We got cut, blah blah blah. Well, if I just had an honest conversation, I would say, well, this is what we're actually going to deliver, and it's just as good.
Wow. So if you had to put yourself on the line and say, in your vast experience of successful companies and some that aren't so successful, what is the most important job in terms of making sure the company succeeds? Is it a strong-willed product person? Is it the architect who can correctly quantify how much complexity is involved in a feature? Is it the engineering manager that knows his team and says, okay, we can crank out 10 features every 2 weeks as opposed to 8 or 12?
Yeah.
What is the most important job? Who gets paid the most?
So I'm sort of I don't know what to call myself. I don't think that any one role is more important than the other, and that kind of is why Inception is kind of a cool concept and why it works, is because everybody comes to the table. You're equal, as long as you have the right shareholders at the table. Everybody is of the same, right? And you're going to make the decision together. So everyone's on the same page, my agendas are aligned, my expectations are aligned, everything's aligned. If you do this, then you can go off your separate ways, because you're going to come back again, right? It's not like, oh, I'll never talk to you ever again, right? I'll be talking to you again the next iteration, which could actually be soon. Like if you have to, like let's say for example, Apple comes along and says, I love your product and I will be your customer, but I need this feature and I need it now, right? So what you do then is you still have to go through Inception. Even though you're going to be reorganizing your engineering assembly line, that product, that feature needs to go through Inception. And then you make a decision what you're going to pull off the assembly line so that this goes on it, and everybody's in agreement.
So now, have you seen this at any of your past companies executed well?
So actually, I've learned this through my employees, to be honest.
Okay.
This last bit was, I believe it was DigitalOcean, is really well known for their agile process, as well as, I'm just now forgetting it. They make one of the tools for agile.
Atlassian?
No. It's an older one. Huh?
Basecamp?
No, it's one of the first agile tools that has Icebox. Anyways, so I had several employees come to work from there. And again, cherry pick, right? You pick the pieces that work for you, and you throw the rest away. And so these companies are incredibly successful, right? And so, it's the other thing too. Listen to your employees, right? Because your employees actually have insight. Like they'll carry along nuggets of information from their previous job, right? And if they were working at a shop that had a great process, then as management or as the CTO or whatever you are, it's an opportunity to learn.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of your laundry list of very famous alma mater companies, Oracle, Nokia, Space Time, Lodestar, Friendster, any of them had the right market focus? Any of them had the right sort of agile Inception setup?
I would argue no. So Friendster was an interesting, and some of this actually predates or is as early as, so if some of you who don't know what Friendster was, we predated Facebook. So Friendster came about the same time that LinkedIn did, and this other company called Spoke that I worked at. Oracle is a sales-driven organization, so that's an awful experience.
Awful.
So, absolutely. So Larry Ellison comes from the CIA, or not so much CIA, but contracting. His approach is that you put 3 people on the same project and you make it adversarial, and one of the groups is going to win. But what really happens, and I can tell you this as a fact, that everyone's sabotaging each other. And in Oracle, the best way to sabotage somebody would be you are the keeper of a piece of information, and you just don't go to the meeting.
Wow.
Yeah, you just don't go to the meeting, so you don't ever
Share your
Yeah,
information.
and then that stops the meeting cold because
Yeah.
you weren't there, and it stops them cold.
Right.
And so that's the culture at Oracle, and how they sell is because they basically will sell their entire product suite at a 90% discount for the first year. So they can say, oh look, we sold Oracle, and we sold identity management, and we sold blah. It's just because it was bundled when you only needed the database, right? You had everything else. So they could check the box. Yeah, we have this market share. And so that was a sales-driven organization.
So there wasn't a good experience for you, I take
God.
it.
Oh no, it's
okay.
awful.
Right,
So,
awful.
and then Space Time was a good example of not really paying attention to the customer. So they had a product that they kept trying to tell the customer that they needed, versus listening to the customer. And the customer needed it for, I think, 2 years.
Okay.
And then the customer's needs changed, and Space Time never did. And then Nokia
yes,
Nokia was a
yes.
great example of just a massive organization. And weirdly enough, because I went there because of the acquisition, and so what would happen was I was new, and I'm like, all right, cool. I'm in IoT. We need indoor location-based positioning system with 5G connectivity because we're talking to FedEx. And I literally had to go talk to one group, then talk to another group, and those two groups never talked to each other and didn't even know of each other. And that was a good example of Nokia.
Wow. Now, was it adversarial, or the Scandinavian countries? They're all very friendly people.
No, it wasn't adversarial at all. Matter of fact, once they figured out that they could help each other, it worked pretty well. It says that nobody paid attention to other because everybody has their little blinders on.
Right.
Right. So
They have a job to do, and they focus on it.
yeah.
Yeah. So changing gears a little bit. So what other considerations for having a successful startup or company are there? I'm cheating a little bit because I talked earlier, and we talked about low-hanging fruit and highest priority. Talk us through, in your experience, when there's one person, there's Bryan in your startup, you hire 25 people, you go from 0 to 25. In an ideal world, what type of features or what type of capabilities do you build, and how does that trajectory go?
Yeah, I mean, bootstrapping a company, I'm actually pretty good at now because I've done 3, sold 1, and helped some people do another one. So going from 0 to 25 is a challenge because, especially if you don't actually have, you think you have an idea for the product, right? But you don't actually have a product. And so adopting kind of an agile process, even when you have 2 people or 5 people, well, 2 people might not because you can just talk to each other. But when you've got at least 5 people, it's good to start going through this process just to make sure you're on the page. And the challenging with bootstrapping a startup is hiring.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's key that the first 10 people you hire should be your foundational engineers, because your company culture, people also like young startup or young entrepreneurs don't really understand or appreciate that they can accidentally create a company culture that may not be what they want. Right, and company culture is really speaks volumes to your company and your ability to succeed. Right, if you have a hostile, toxic environment, nobody's going to want to work for you. You're never going to succeed, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. If you have a supportive, non-blame, so our environment, every time you never blame, right, and it's all peer reviewed, but the peer review is to help. Right, we want to help each other. We want to be better. So you know something, I know something, but let's help each other be better, right? You never blame, never blame anyone. It's just you can do a postmortem and understand where something failed, but the goal is never blame, right? You just want people. So your company culture is incredibly important. So the problem is that your first people you hire are ultimately going to be the foundation of that company culture. And so for me, hiring the first 20 people, it took me 18 months to hire the first 20 people at Lodestar, right? Because you need to make sure you find the right people. And sometimes, luckily we were well funded, and so we could afford to pay, obviously not a Google salary, but we could pay a good market rate. And ultimately at the end of the day, why people wanted to work for me was because of the culture, right? We had a really fun tool. We're working on AI. Who doesn't like AI these days? We were working on a video annotation tool, but yet we created this culture. And so it's important because even though I'm no longer there, so I decided I did what I said I was going to do. After we're at 20 to 25, I stepped back. But I'm comfortable in knowing that the people I hired adopted this culture, right? So it's nascent, right? So not only is your company new, but your teams are new. They're new to working each other, and so it's important over 18 months. You can instill in them a culture that's positive, that's helpful, that gets people, and is also not, that's not toxic, and that's something that that you can be honest, and if you need time off to go deal with your son's thing or go do something, take it.
Right. And now I'm tempting fate here, but have you seen that in other companies, or you haven't really seen that anywhere?
Well, so this is kind of interesting, is it's only towards the end of my career that I really discovered, the secret to kind of, what I would say, creating a successful startup from scratch, right, is just really focus on culture. Focus on culture, focus on communication, and creating a place where people are honest.
Right. Fascinating. Yeah, Airbnb pops into my mind that it seems to be a very harmonious company, driven by a designer as a CEO, not an engineer, designer, but really has the right EQ and the right company ethos.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So what about products in terms of product features initially to get off the ground? How do you define what your minimum viable product is, and how do you then execute and make that a success?
So that's a great question. So I am now, what I fill my time with, other than doing community free public Wi-Fi, is I do consulting. And so I'm consulting with a friend of mine. He's starting an ESG company, so it's environmental sustainability and governance. And
Elon doesn't like them, by the way, does he?
No, he doesn't.
No.
And it's quickly become a crowded space. So he's trying to pivot from being a consulting company, so they do everything manual, they produce these manual PDFs, to becoming a tech company. And so we're going through this process of all right, what do we build? Right? What are you actually doing? What is your product? And so this is what we're doing. We're going to go through a 12-week process of doing product discovery. Mm-hmm. Right? We're going to sit down and try to figure out what is the product that they're actually delivering. Right? And then, because we're lucky here, is that they have some customers, so lighthouse partners. So it gives you an opportunity to talk to your customer and say, hey, what if I built this? Would you use it? So in one of the companies that I started that we sort of shelved was going to be in logistics, and we actually did this, and sadly we didn't get funded, but we went out and we found lighthouse partners that would potentially be our customer, and they actually were cool. They agreed to.
Now, lighthouse is a technical term for the teaching customer.
Yeah, they're going to help you build your so they'll be happy to talk to you about their business, about what they need, what they're doing, and so if you get we had 4 lighthouse partners, and it was great because you could then start to see, because if you build a product for one customer, so one lighthouse customer is very dangerous.
Siemens with GOFACTOry.
Yes, because then you're going to basically build a Siemens product.
Right.
Right. So one lighthouse partner is very dangerous, right? Or one partner, because you're going to be building a product that they need, and then nobody else might need it, right? 2 is still dangerous, but if you can get 3 to 5 lighthouse partners, where you can then regularly go and say, all right, cool. And so they can actually start to become part of this process. So they become a stakeholder in this inception process. So maybe they don't have the time, but you can at least take some time and show them your screens, like your lo-fi and your high definition, right? And say, would you use this? And if they all say no, right, well then, you've got some problems. Either A, you got the wrong 5 customers, right? Or you're just, you're not building the right thing.
Right.
More than likely, you're not building the right thing. Because if you have to go find customers, then technically you're a solution in search of a problem.
Right. Which is potentially your engineering-driven
Yeah.
company you don't want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Or it's also could be a marketing-driven company that just doesn't understand the market.
Marketeers never get anything wrong. No.
So,
I'm being facetious, yeah. Well, that was a very interesting discussion. So my key takeaway is that, one of them is that for the agile process, you should really be focused on in the concept and the importance of Inception, where the different stakeholders meet, they agree on features, what can be achieved, and they iteratively every 2 weeks or so go back and reassess that.
yes.
And that really makes you more likely to succeed than not.
I would say yes. And then the other thing to add into that is cadence. Make sure you pick a cadence where your engineers, you don't want to say, all right, you only have to work 2 hours a day right now. Because some engineers might come back and say, well, that's my cadence.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Right? But you want to avoid, because I have actually been at companies in my career where they use burn down and burn up to just say, oh, well, you're burning down, this iteration, so you can work harder, right? And so they use Agile and Scrum and sprints to just drive and drive and drive and drive and drive, and it's arbitrary. It's like, what does this 2 weeks mean, right? Like, why am I working on these features? Right? And you could be as an engineer, you're going, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen, right? And then you're just going to create crap code. Well, if you're at the table with product and they kind of educate you on this feature and you have a conversation back with them, then now when you're working on it, you're like, I understand this. This is actually pretty cool.
Right. So everyone has to be bought in. It's motherhood and apple pie. Everyone has to understand the direction the company's going in, why we're building these features.
Yeah. Well, to a point, obviously you're not going to get buy-in by everyone, and that's when you kind of make an executive decision.
Right.
But the idea is you want everyone on the same page.
Got it. Well, fascinating discussion.